Tonight's session will first feature Professor Knut from your institution is University of Bergen, and Joyce Liu from here at the交大Daxia. And as before, the format will be the same, 20 to 25 minutes for each speaker. Time will be at the back, and then at the end, I'll ask you to respond to each other if you have comments, and then we'll open up the floor to discussion. So without further ado, I'll pass the microphone to the first speaker.
Hello? Yes. Good morning, I might say. I think we've already touched on some of the things I'm going to talk about in the previous session. And I am, of course, also associated with Bruce here in the project. And one of the things we talked about early on in the project was this concept of wealth, since in the many of the ideological movements around inequality and egalitarianism, the question of wealth comes up very quickly, and especially through this idea that wealth should be equally distributed. And like the question that Derek asked just now in the session earlier, he was wondering about global inequality, and there's something about this. We have this tendency to go very quickly into discussions about economic inequality when we discuss inequality. We in a sense jump directly to economic inequality. And global inequality, if we were going to discuss that, what would that be apart from economic inequality in a sense? So there's something here that I just want to shake a little bit the concepts of how we could actually start thinking differently about this aporia, in a sense, if we might call it that. The often made point that whereas capitalism knows a lot about the price of things, it knows very little about their value. And so I guess I'm just after it's kind of a naive take on this issue of wealth being a possible opening into this question of an alternative to capitalism, and where we can actually start thinking about and grasp our situation where we desperately need to frame some alternative concepts. And so I'm trying to find in wealth, in the concept of wealth, a possible alternative to capital. So I'll try to read a little bit of the text so I can stick to the point. To the Vikings of Norway and Denmark, wealth or riches was a particular domain of life associated with the aristocratic and royal realm. The great expeditions of plunder and taking of treasures to Russia, to the Mediterranean, to the British Islands and the continent were measured in the wealth of slaves, gold, silver and textiles that they could bring back. King Harald Hardrada in the 11th century was in the sagas reported to bring back enormous riches from his travels. And this became his main foundation for asserting his place as the king of the realm. The wealth did not figure so much as property, nor as exchangeable goods, but it was given as dowry or as gifts to other members of the aristocracy. It was invested into the building of armies and castles, or it was burned and buried in great potlatches in association with death. Women, slaves, soldiers, and specific goods figured as wealth, but as inseparable from the aristocratic realm of power. Words for wealth, such as rikdom in Norwegian, or Reichtum in German, or richesse in French, grew out of that meaning. And rikr in Old Norse and back to its Germanic roots, and possibly also related to Celtic reg and Gothic reiks, meant kingdom, reign, realm, or estate, reflected for instance, in the ending of Henrik or Frederick as kingly names. This specific association with the kingdom, or at least chiefly power and authority, is perhaps after all not so remote from the concept of wealth that developed within the English-speaking world. Wealth was used from mid-13th century for happiness, and also prosperity and abundance of possessions or riches, developing from Middle English welle as well-being, as borrowed from West Germanic wello. And this sense of well has also survived in our Norwegian language as well, as used for an association looking after the commons and common good of the local area. In this sense, wealth is more a regional association, health and governance, where riches are more directly an alienable mark of status and power. Contained in between the two words, riches and wealth, hence lies an implication of not only of power of a state and aristocracy, but also an interest in the commons and the well-being of the subjects of the realm. No doubt such concepts as commonwealth and state have also absorbed these earlier perspectives, combining power and well-being. So it's this idea that we now have this overcoming up of distribution, equal distribution of wealth, is kind of a contradiction in terms, because wealth has this specific association, inseparable from the realm or the power of the kingdom to start with. In most of Northern Europe, there were small landed peasant families' properties, where land was clearly divisible and without strong central powers. Harald Hardrada, the Viking king of Norway, did not have a centralized kingdom, but was more of a traveling king, so to speak, whose only source of power was his conquered wealth, and who had to keep traveling and conquering to keep his wealth-based power. By contrast, in English feudalism, landed estates became indivisible and alienated from the people, in the sense that they could not be split into parts to be taken apart. In contrast to the other kingdoms in Northern Europe, which could at any time be challenged by the citizens who were, richdom-wise at least, sovereigns in their own territories, the English crown instead became a commonwealth, a centralized kingdom where the central crown was one and the same as the realm, and as its wealth and the well-being of its subjects. So the concept of wealth also managed to maintain its status and meaning then, despite its conflict with these notions of individual profit and the profit natural law of the economy that was emerging. That was actually the conflicts that continued to dominate the discourse on nation and wealth for centuries. And for instance, in Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations from 1776, the concern was much broader than just accumulation of profit or money or property. He included in his consideration health, peace, a social system, and a working state and fair distribution. Here, wealth is the opposite of ilth, as pointed out by Louis Mumford, the opposite of misery, mutilation, destruction, terror, starvation, and death, such as is the production of a war. Wealth, by contrast, is the non-material. Is by contrast the non-material outcomes of productive processes, such as social heritage, art and sciences and knowledge, play and adventure and drama. In short, wealth is life itself. What we call wealth is in fact wealth only when it is a sign of potential or actual vitality, says Louis Mumford. In this way, wealth in Europe was until recently inseparable from the state, and as pointed out by Chris Gregory in Savage Money in the book, the king's head was therefore stamped on coins and bills when money was invented in the 18th century, as both a mark of the sovereign state on the valuable and for securing its value. Wealth was part of the estate of the king, as also each coin circulating belonged to the king. Cash was king, to put it like that. It's not my purpose to go too deeply into the historical entanglements here and the developments of our two concepts of wealth and riches. The idea here is merely to make the point that the historical meanings of these concepts tend to be forgotten and eclipsed by new meanings. Hence, for instance, even though we now largely see wealth as capital and accumulated money, the importance of power and status cling to this wealth as capital, even though wealth is no longer tied up to kingdom directly. And if we turn our back to these northern European concepts and face other concepts of wealth, like Joyce will do afterwards, we find we can only speculate on how these two concepts and ways of life that we find expressed through them compare with other concepts. We must then also submit to the fact that these other concepts have gone through complex historical processes, also cross-cultural encounters, and radical changes and revolutions. Okay, so I will fast forward to our own situation. The issue of wealth is still of overwhelming importance today in contemporary society. However, paradoxically, wealth is part of our life now mostly as an issue of absence rather than presence. People wonder where wealth is, who is in control of it, and how it can be accessed. And most of the time, wealth is itself inaccessible. And I think that analytically, here we have a job to do, in a sense, in trying to map out this alternative understanding of what that concept of wealth means. And the great social movements are organized around creating an equal distribution of wealth. Corporations compete over controlling its accumulation. It is present in economists' analysis as unequal distribution of wealth, or in media speculations of how corporate magnates have managed to accumulate so much of it. In the news, when someone has won a great prize at the lotteries. And however, it's not something that we include as part of our lives, really, as inherent in our daily work or in our salaries, in our purchases at the stores, or in our leisure activities. So what to make of wealth then, when it's no longer part of kingdom and a state, so to speak? The global cultural history of wealth demonstrates how its presence has always been considered a spiritual force, a principle of growth, as well as a powerful and dangerous presence. The obligation to redistribute and give away wealth, as opposed to hoarding and storing, was always an important principle for solid social systems, since distribution maintained leadership, and social values and social coherence as essentially immaterial values. So we need to go back to these lessons, and even maybe beyond Marx. For Marx, as well as Morse and Polanyi in anthropology, a critical aspect of modernity and capitalism originated when forms of immovable and inalienable wealth, such as land and natural resources, family or clan property, infrastructure or capacities for work, sex, and consumption, were set free from social structures of kinship or aristocracy, and recycled as movable and alienated property. The commodity form was thus invented as a specific new form of wealth, but one that, historically speaking, also broke away from and negated the concept of wealth as a deeply embedded social form. According to Marx and Polanyi, society was transformed from being based on the wealth form as a spiritual, qualitative, and generative principle based on essential properties of gods, land, and kin, to becoming based on the commodity form as quantitative, distributive, and based on exchange and consumption. But I would like to then question this idea from Marx's Capital and other major works that the world has now become a fully economic world, completely invested into the circuit of labor, production, and money. Of course, there are several ways of using wealth as a concept, and in contemporary popular language, it is lacking. As it is used mostly for property, infrastructure, accumulated money, etc. And in this sense, it's not distinguished from fortune or capital. In recent efforts, such as by economist Piketty, the focus has been on distribution of wealth and inequality and access to wealth. And in a sense, the evaluation of inequality or egalitarianism along the lines of economic inequality is, in a way, a poor judgment of egalitarianism, as Alain was pointing out earlier. A poor standard for evaluation. But from an anthropological point of view, I would argue that the opposition between wealth and money has continued to hold, even though the wealth form is often eclipsed by capital and out of view. I would like to argue that this opposition continues to hold in place a perpetual dynamic inherent in modernity. The intricate dynamics of conversion between quantity and quality, ritual wealth and disembedded matter, most often in some form of money, are a constant source of social intensity. The power of number is constantly also countermeasured by the impotence of quantity in the face of originality, inventions, or real wealth that can only be located in items of historical authenticity. This has always been the problem of new money in contrast with old money, and a reason why people who qualify as rich by quantitative measures do not actually themselves consider themselves wealthy. This was reported in a survey by Time magazine recently. Further, the conversion of wealth into other forms, into money, commodities, debt, or fame, is never really straightforward. And these attempts at conversion run into different problems in different places. Taboo on converting water, for instance, into a commodity in European debates about the commons might stand in contrast to the forms and metaphors that wealth takes in India or Melanesia, where conversions take other forms. But what is wealth? No, I'll skip through this, I think. In ethnographic observations about wealth, we find that there is always a world outside of capital, outside of the circuitry of markets, commodities, labor, and money. This is something that we might frame as life itself, as I said earlier. We find things tied to values that resist and object to being counted, sold, or manufactured. An easy and simplistic example would be the thing that we call a home. One can, of course, come to sell one's home and one's house, but at that point, there is a conversion taking place, since whereas one party is selling a home, the other is buying real estate. You cannot really live in real estate, or at least if you live in your house as a form of real estate, you live there differently from living there at home. Between real estate and home, there has to be a process of conversions that will be ongoing with much tension throughout a generation or several generations. In big cities like Paris or London, the real estate value of houses has become so high that many houses are not even lived in anymore. They are instead used as investments in a booming housing market. And in the most expensive areas of these cities, houses are left empty, waiting to be sold again at the right time. Their conversion from home to real estate has become more or less permanent. For an anthropology of wealth, we find that these types of conversions are worth exploring, and they allow us to hold on to the concept of wealth as that which is in tension with capital, commodities, or money. And I think with Jane Geyer and also going back to some of your classic anthropologists, we've seen an emphasis on how wealth has actually developed independently of the discipline of economy. And these lessons could perhaps be given a broader relevance. A classic example here are the Northwest Indians as described by Boas. In Goldman's, the book, The Mouth of Heaven, for instance, he outlines how these hunters and gatherers organized their entire world around the sociality of their animal world. The animal world, so to speak, imposes itself on the concepts of wealth. Quaquital wealth comes in the form of mammalian skins or prestigious items such as boxes, canoes, or shield-shaped coppers that have animal associations. The skins represent the mammals directly as the unconsumed and durable manifestation of the gift they make of themselves to humans. The exchange of animal skins connect the human community with the animal world, but in a cycle of life that is essentially a spiritual journey from animal to man to spirit. Economic activity was not separate from ritual, nor merely ritualized, but an integral part of ceremonial life. In this large ceremonial complex, the main form of wealth were names, as ceremonial titles that mediated between the world of men, animals, and spirits. The names had weight and mass, and every assumption, transferal, or passing on of a name required a mountain of skins or blankets, as these mountains would work as bridges between the natural world and the spirits. But we need perhaps not go to these historic and exotic societies to retrieve a concept of wealth. Inside modernity and inside capitalism itself, there are crucial wealth forms that continue to hold on to their inalienability. Kat Weston has, for instance, studied how the idea of blood and flowing bodily fluids has shaped Western thinking of wealth. And my argument is therefore, it's tending towards a notion of wealth where it is not substituted by capital, but actually maintained and extended by it. The opposition between the commodity form, so central to capital, that we see as quantitative, distributive, and based on exchange and consumption, and the wealth form as a spiritual, qualitative, and generative principle based on essences of land, family, and vitality, continues to hold as a perpetual dynamic opposition inherent in modernity. The intricate dynamics of conversion between quantity and quality, ritual wealth and disembedded matter, are a constant source of social intensity, I would argue. The power of numbers is constantly also countermeasured by the impotence of quantity in the face of originality or real wealth that can only be located in items of historical authenticity. So I would just like to mention that central to this argument would then be Annette Weiner's point about inalienable property. And in a way, Annette Weiner, by saying that whereas things are given away, and this could also be extended to the market, whereas things are sold, they also hold back capacities of themselves, vital capacities for human life. And she thereby reframes Polanyi's idea of these fictitious commodities. Certain forms of wealth did not naturally belong in the commodity sphere, since they were not produced for the market. Mainly, in his view, labor, essentially human active time, and land as people's natural surroundings. And the point for Polanyi was that the market subordinated also social and natural substances to its laws by beginning to administer labor and land as commodities. But by calling that process of making commodities a fiction, he was also arguing that these things should not be entirely, or could not be entirely appropriated by the market. Both the category of the person and the category of land would hold in reserve some part of their social value, also after being bought or sold, as a part that would still be claimed in the name of the social entity in question, the social community. In Weiner's terms, that part is the inalienable part, or what she calls transcendent treasures. And this is something that the market forces have kept running up against over and over again in their history of appropriation. In my written version of this paper, I don't know if I have time to go through it all, but I find it also fascinating that as a symptom of this tension between inalienable wealth and alienable wealth, there is a symptom of this conversion is when things reach incredibly high prices in the market. So high prices that they are almost invaluable, we could say. And so I'm mentioning in my paper just some of these examples of invaluable wealth, so to speak. For instance, these African masks being sold at auctions, African initiation masks being sold at record high prices, like 4 million euros for one of these famous masks from Mali. And this has to do with its history of ceremonial initiation of young boys, of course, ancestor cult, and the expressivity of its carving style. And one could also mention sports as a domain of vitality. We all know that the record for a football player, Neymar, when he went to Paris, was 1 billion euros. I'm also looking at horse racing, and some of these prized horses and the sperm of prized horses reach like 200 million euros for one horse. And these fields of cultural heritage and sports surely attract finance capital's attention because they interest audiences, of course. But this also has to do with these vital qualities for capitalism, which are about skills, spiritual capacities of ancestors, pedigrees, speed and sperm. These are essential qualities for a cosmology of finance. So just to conclude quickly, very quickly, before we go on. I guess my point has to do with wealth being, in a way, a mystical principle. And I'm not sure we have a good handle on this missing part of our economic analysis, concealing itself behind the visible forms of capital as a shadow lurking behind the capitalist setup. So it appears as an ancient fossil form, inconceivably working against the democratic, transparent, and distributive ideals of modern society. It withdraws inside the enclaves of new aristocracies, estates, and family heirlooms, as it is perceived to be inalienable from their lifeblows of pedigree, vitality, and blood. Its absence from the here and now has transformed it from a category central for common well-being to a distant, almost mythological category. Instead of invigorating people and places where they are, it has been given a narrow and secluded function for invigorating only power and capital in time spaces kept apart. Okay, so I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you all for this very interesting, challenging conference or workshop, trying to build up some sort of dialogue between anthropology or non-anthropology to other fields like philosophy or political thoughts and so on. Actually, in my text, I have brought up some of my comments directly addressing Knut's talk. But I think my central issue or text here is not to provide any alternative concept such as wealth or the unalienable wealth, but how to deal with this partition or separation of wealth from the very beginning in all societies. How do we deal with it? How do we think of any analytical perspective, a materialistic and dialectic analytical perspective? That, to me, that would involve a topological analysis. Okay, and that has to be adjusted or changed according to different historical period of time and different social construct. So that logic of separation actually is a real issue that we need to think. But before that, I think I really want to share with you very briefly, maybe 2-3 minutes of what we are doing here in our center. We do have, let's see. All right. That doesn't show right away, but we organize a workshop, for example, discussing, bringing people from the law school, from sociology, from NGOs, from local activist group to discuss the unequal migrant labor law. And also we bring people from South Korea, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Philippines to discuss how they deal with their social inequality from different corners. We also built up a joint project with a group of scholars from 7 to 12 different institutes and around 20 to 30 scholars. And we visit Ho Chi Minh City and Kuala Lumpur to learn more about their local scholars, how do they deal with their refugee issues, their Afghanistan refugee theater of the oppressed, and how they organize their own refugee activist group for the past 30 years. Or we organize people from Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia to communicate with one another how their theater of oppressed functioned in the past 30 years. And of course, in addition to the theatrical practices, we have also artists, or we have scholars and other things. So, for example, next year we are working on this summer school for this migration, logistic, and unequal citizens. And through our working with different scholars, we really learn how do they deal with their local aporia or conundrum, or this severe excluded group of people, the unheard, uncounted people. So then we actually open up ourselves to try to think, how do we come up with some sort of, I want to come back to my text, yeah. Functional or operatable analytic work. So let me just move on. I think I can skip because everybody knows about Knut's talk already. So my comment is that I would like to start from some reflections of some traditional Chinese practices, but my comment, instead of following in the end, but I will just bring it up here. I would suggest that from ancient time, the concept of wealth, that is prosperity, abundance, happiness, is always connected with that of poverty as a contrast in the social hierarchical level. So poverty, that is fear, lack of resource and deficiency. And in the primitive tribal societies, the wealth was measured by the size of plenitude and counted, actually from the very beginning, counted by per capita. That is maybe per capita, a cow or substituted by shell money or other things. So this primitive value form or money form, such as shell money, in order to process the exchange of goods that they need. So women, slaves, or laborers are already used as gift or tribute in the exchange of good social relations or the balance of power between families, clans, tribes, or kingdoms. The accumulation and expansion of wealth or realm are to increase the power to keep the state from being annexed or devoured by the competitive neighboring clans, tribes, and kingdoms. The division of class between the rich people who holds power and wealth from the poor people who are in need and who have to serve the rich people is inherent in the social construct. So let's take a look at some ancient classical Chinese concept. I need to come back to my text. But the examples that I use here, for example, the oral bone script that is 1,030 years BC, or the Chinese bronze inscriptions that's about the second millennium or to 11th or 3rd century BC, or some more readable written forms in this silk manuscript or in the Third Kingdom or Spring and Autumn period and Warring period, that is around 700 years before BC, before Christ, and so on. The concept of example, the term the wealth in Chinese can be associated both with the character of fu, that is prosperity, and fu, that's well-being and happiness. And these two homophonic characters indicate the close relations between abundance and happiness. Moreover, the fact that the two characters share the same radical, that is this thing, okay. Yeah, there's a radical here. That indicate the material form of wealth, that is the field, the large field, the vast field, or the vast and cloth and so on. So there's a wealth here, the first one, okay, fu, is represented by the extensive field owned by the house. The house is represented by this cover, okay. That is similar to, we know that for family, okay, that is, we have the pig in a house, okay, so that is the character for the family, but it's also around 130 years BC and so on. But the concept of fu, on the other hand, is a vast farmland blessed by the divinity. So when we say rich, okay, 家财万贯, the concept of richness, that means thousands of strings of shell shell money, okay. There's a string of shells, okay, that can represent 万贯, okay, that is, we have thousands and thousands of shells, okay. So this uncountability of the numerous string of shell money, and the concept of, so this is, that's used, of course, in ancient China, and this is a different script for this concept, the shell or money, shell money, in different historical period of time. So the term for economy or goods, 货, okay, in Chinese means the upper part of this commodity is 化, that is to change, mutation, okay. So how do we change the shell money, okay, and so on. So to change the money form refers to the transformation of the money form. And then similar, at 货值, the classical term for economy. Economia, of course, we know that is the management, administration of the law within a household. But from the ancient time, from Greece, this household includes slaves, include farmers, include laborers and women, okay, at the margin, of course. So this concept of 货值 in Chinese is to accumulate and expand the goods and product. This 值 is to grow, okay, to grow, to increase, and so on. But that concept, of course, starts actually very early on. It's not in late 8th century or 16th century. It's from the very beginning. Okay, so as a contrast, the concept of 贫, we know that rich, wealth, or 贫, poverty or lack, deficiency, and poverty is represented by the divided shell money, divided. So how this money is divided, okay, is a question, of course. So the upper radical of this 贫, lack, okay, poor, I think it's an extremely interesting concept in Chinese. This 分, all right, take apart by a knife in between, the opposite, okay, and so on. So the 分, the division of shells, not only of the shell, okay, the cut, the partition, is an essential key word in Chinese concept. 分 means both to separate, to cut, to divide, but also to be apart, to share one portion. That's made a single pensée. But to remain, partition, the French, to remain in the appointed position after the partition. That is the rightful status, 名分. In a strictly hierarchical order, one should observe and never transgress. So concerning the question of the common, we need to ask, who are the commons? Actually, originally should be the poor people, right? Not we bourgeois. Whose common well-beings? Okay, for those people, as Stalin said, at the edge or the accountable, invisible, who cares about their well-being? From the very beginning, okay? And who are the subjects of the realms? Later on, that's the citizens of the realm, okay? Not the subject of the colonial motherland. How is the line of separation drawn among the community? To me, it is the logic of partition, the transformation of institutions, the evolution of the techniques that requires our critical analysis. The line of separation within the society between those who can possess or inherit the prosperity. In ancient Chinese, it's always inherited land and the growth of land and property and so on. So to inherit the prosperous and plenty of wealth, and those who are stripped of these opportunities and should stay in the appointed position, consequently is determined also by the society. The hierarchical gap between the master and the slave, between men and women, between the adult and the minors, among different ethnic groups is also determined. We can see that clearly in all different dynastic periods throughout Chinese history. Okay, clearly structured. So, and those who should serve as slaves are the people of vice. We can take a look of the concept of slave. By but the slave is immediately connected to 罪. Okay, that is, this is myself. It is miserable. Okay, but well, this is the ancient term. But then it's you substituted by the term 罪. Okay, but this slave, 奴, and they indicate both men and women. So that means who the ones, both men and women who sinned or who are wrong, who do not belong, and those who have to serve manual labor. So this radical part here is the hand, okay, manual labor. And the sinners, those who are in debt, those who are from the defeated clans, okay, not necessarily kingdom yet, but the clans. And the people who are offered as gifts to flatter the Lord and the King, in one word, the ones who do not share the common and their well-beings, if we really want to think of well-being, and their subsistence are not the community's concern. Their rightful position, 名分, is to serve the other members in the family and the society. The enclosure around the state, the land, actually from the very beginning, the establishment of household, clans, tribes, and states. The Chinese character of the state, 国, indicate, actually, this is a weapon from the oracle bone script to the bronze inscription. That is, this weapon supported the enclosure of the land. So the strong tribes or countries can conquer neighboring countries or take captives as slaves. The neighboring countries will also offer their tribute to the dominant state as gift. Kunlun Nu, a very popular figure in Chinese ancient fiction around 7th and 10th century from the Tang Dynasty. Of course, that should start much earlier. Based on historical archives, they are the tribute either from former Vietnam or from Malaysia. The feature is that they have curly hair, black skin, and so on. Okay. So if we really aspire for a society of coexistence with equal participation and mutual support, we need to first see through the matrix of internal coloniality, a system of domination and exploitation through the operation of capital and the extraction of labor and all resources. Otherwise, the power relation within the matrix of internal colonialism will repeat itself through an entire system of reproduction. Sartre, in 1964, in the article, colonialism is a system expressed that it involves economic, social, and political apparatus. It is not an abstract mechanism. The system exists, it functions. The internal cycle of colonialism is a reality, but this reality is embedded or embodied in a million colonists, children and grandchildren of colonists, who have been shaped by colonialism and who think, speak, and act according to the very principle of the colonial system. But this colonial system, discussed by Sartre, however, does not really operate only at the remote colonies such as Algeria and Morocco, but internally in one's own country. That repeats, the implementation of institutional system and bureaucratic controls, as discussed by Habermas, augmented the internal exploitation and conflict to the extent that some parts of the people in the same society were exploited, excluded, and cannot enjoy equal opportunity to actualize their capacities. For Habermas, this paradox pointed to the question of capitalist modernity and brought about both the colonization of the life work and its segmentation. But to me, the line of separation determines the classification of people within the same society, functions internally and varies according to different historical contexts through different institutionalization and bureaucratic modality. So that is something we need to analyze again and again. Facing today's society, the rapid increase of migrants in the 21st century further intensified the interiorization of border politics in the neighborhood daily. According to the statistic, the estimate of total number of international, including internal, migrants had amounted to 272 million in mid-2019. That is about 173 million from 2000. But compared to maybe 1960, there were only perhaps about 70 million. It's already a 200 million difference. And among the total number of international migrants, about 100 million international migrants were from Asia, or 83 million migrating within Asia. So the massive inflow of migrants, of course, excite local resistance and civic exclusion. Citizen identity demonstrate the imaginary relation that identify with the community guaranteed by their citizenship. What comes to with the status of citizenship is not only the protection of fundamental human rights, but also the assurance of the social right, political right, civil right, and the equal access to the social space. Such civic identity, however, often is in disguise of the legitimation of their act of discrimination, racism, act of exclusion against other humans. So these impulsive nationalistic behaviors and value systems became so correct and self-justifiable to the extent that they motivate people to judge and act spontaneously and unconsciously. So, yeah, time is almost up, right? Maybe I just move on. So, when we discuss the concept of citizen or citizenship, we are actually analyzing and challenging and questioning the legal ideology supported by the citizenship concept, which, even though it's a Western concept, but it is actually practiced internally in all post-colonial countries, at least in Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, and elsewhere. Okay, but that started from the colonial period, the division, partition of people in terms of race. So I would actually study the motivation started from a very early project that I worked with my student from Indonesia who studied this Indonesian fishermen on Chinese fishing vessel, and that was reported by the Chinese reporter magazine, but also Indonesian Temple magazine. But this slavery at sea, this image to me, that's actually a metaphorical and figurative trope addressing all this forced labor, okay, that they are in this customized and standardized containers. Okay, and but I would suggest that the contemporary policy of temporary guest laborers in many countries, okay, is a modern legal form of indentured labor, contract labor, and actually the residue of the slave trade system from the past, and so on. But they happen in our communities, in daily life, so that is something we need to look into. So I would suggest a topological concept of this analysis. That is, we look at a genealogy of the extraction of labor from local society and the transformation or syncretism. Institutional syncretism is very interesting, okay, that inherit the traditional feudal society system down to this modern state and neoliberal market practices. But the other axis should be a study, a genealogy of the logistics, that is all the infrastructure and the preparation of the line of supply, demand, and consumption. But another axis is the practice locally, the citizenship politics, and the line of separation. So when we talk about topological images or patterns, those are not determined strictly, but they will vary according to different local conditions. So from ancient time, I would like to look back into the Chinese system, but also with the tribute war down through the whole entire Southeast Asia, but also maybe with Central Asia and so on, and see how this slave trade, okay, was practiced and changed into indentured labor. Of course, after the slave trade was banned in US and UK, indentured labor, coolie, or replacing, okay? And then there's a guest labor and so on. So for those people, okay, but then we need to also work on this, the line of logistics, and to see the map of the casualties of the new imperium. So that was supported and linked through their local broker, cross-border supply chain, transnational entrepreneurial network, to the shipping of commodity, local infrastructures of the receiving society, juridical processes, that is to regulate the labor conditions and excluding the migrant labor, so the employment out of the country at sea, that is. And the citizenship politics, that is local citizens, they have their right to reject or to treat these migrant laborers as slaves, okay, in their household. And so this is a consumption of the labor, the extraction of labor, of course, is to increase the wealth of the state and the family. And though all these juridical legal practices will support and serve as a line of separation. So I'll just stop here. All right.
I would like to invite maybe Knut first to respond. Not respond, but maybe if you have any comments for Joyce Liu.
Yes, thank you very much. That was an impressive talk, and of course of great relevance to the audience, as it was specifically about Chinese history. I thought it was really interesting and enlightening. Your study of the old inscriptions, and maybe my comments relate to this. Because you start out with a very quick conclusion that wealth is always in opposition to poverty. So if there is prosperity, there has also come poverty. And you say that this is the situation in every society. And I think maybe, and of course, this is what I'm after in my reconceptualization of wealth, to try to avoid exactly that conclusion that wealth should be in opposition to poverty, as in economic terms. Since wealth, and I mentioned that this idea that wealth should be seen in opposition to ill, in the original English sense. And I'm wondering about your, and I was interested in those, the origin of the sign language, symbolic language, Chinese writing. And Chinese writing, I guess this is my question, I don't know anything but I would assume that when Chinese writing comes into being, it comes into being as in a total sense, so that it's already the implications of a state form. So that writing itself is the implications of the inscriptions of a state form to the categories of the world. So that when you say that there is a sign here in the early period for prosperity, which is such and such, there is also a sign for the early society for poverty, for the slave. This has to be kind of understood within that early formation of the state, inscribing onto things a sign language. So I was wondering about because it cannot be so that the sign for poverty is actually in opposition to prosperity, even in that sign language. Since especially since the sign for poverty is this sign. This has to do with a cut, you say, and you give us some sort of an interpretation of the cut as poverty, and it seems that the cut is then the cut is also a part, and it seems that the state is here inscribing poverty as a cut and a part of a total society or a total assemblage, in a sense, and that it, so to speak, poverty as a part and a cut is then a sort of a form, an essential part of hierarchy in that sense. It's a hierarchical form, and it's not in opposition to prosperity maybe, but as a part of prosperity, as a total system. That would be kind of my kind of instinct, you know, to think about those things. Yeah. And it was really interesting the way you ended the paper with these reflections on the labor trade and as in relation to that. And here I think that yours and mine reflections are kind of have similar agenda at least. So I guess that would be my comment. I don't know if this is working or.
Of course, I share with your project because we also have this project of a society toward equal coexistence, society of coexistence and equality, and so on. We have that aspiration, but we think the analytical work has to start before that claim, okay, of the equal society. But this, of course, there are transmutation of the meaning of the word. For example, the radical 分, okay, from 分 to changing to 分, that is to cut, and then changing to stay at your place after the partition. That would show, okay, the historical processes from a very primitive mode of cut to a very hierarchically older society, okay. And but in the very beginning, its practice, the poverty is to divide the money from the very beginning. So money form started, of course, as everybody knows, that in every primitive tribe, they have different way to substitute. That is what Marx was saying, right? Even the development of individual unalienated potential capacity is Marx's ideal. Okay, but he started from this analysis of how that was deprived or separated from the real life. Okay, so and the labor is measured according to not only to the market but to the society who needs it, right? So there's the money is divided, or the thousand strings of shell indicate richness. Okay, and there's a large field under the house or owned by the house, or a large field blessed by the divinity that indicate wealth. But there will be people serving. That doesn't need to be started from the state, but from the family, just like in Greece. Economia, the echo, the house. Already there's a division of the parts, the labor, the farmer, and carpenter, and so, and women are at the side, right? And not to mention foreigners and slaves. So economia, how to manage the house or the state. There's a large house, a clan, like in Chinese, the clan of different families. When they are large enough, they can annex the neighboring clans and become kingdom. Okay, and they devour the neighboring kingdom, and they grew large. So if you look at the changes of the map of Chinese history from, as I said, from 1,000 years before the Common Era, BC, okay, to 400 before when they were a warring state, different kingdoms, and to the Mongolian period, and to the Song Dynasty. So the realm territory, they grow and shrink depending on whether they have enough strength, power, weapon, and so on. Okay. So, but before there's a unification of all those kingdoms, small states, in the tribe, we know the tribal society, they are not totally equal. Yeah, so that is my thought, but I don't think we need to stick to the traditional classical form, but we need to see how those logic of separation functions in our society, and whether the 21st century is different from the 19th century colonial expansion. Is the colonization comes within the society. They don't need to take another land, but they just utilize whatever resources they can. So free trade and other things.
So what I would like to do,
is I'd like to maybe collect 2 or 3 questions, and then we can answer those. So the floor is open.
I don't know if I need that.
Very short question for Joyce. I really enjoyed your presentation, also as I work on inequality, of course. I was just wondering about your notion of coloniality or colonialism, yeah? Because I didn't hear any mention of post-colonial or decolonial, so I was wondering, within the horizon of your analysis of this global system and its historicity, is there a moment or a potential for a post-colonial emancipation, departure, rupture, or a decolonial kind of re-inscription? A very short question.
Other questions?
On the same line, question to Professor Joyce. I really enjoyed and I like your talk. Especially the place where you explain how we went the transformation from the slavery to the cheap labor. Talking to about the decolonization, because those who transform this because they want to set up another form to keep the power in their hand, to keep the leadership of the distribution. So in this context, how shall we do with the decolonization process? Thank you.
I think maybe
one more question, and if it's related, it's especially welcome as well.
Mine is for Knut. One of the things I've noticed about our discussion in the previous panel as well as this one is that everyone follows the customary philosophical anthropological habit of speaking in terms of binaries. And I wonder, because I was particularly interested in your notion of wealth versus riches, and I wonder if there's been any work done on what you might call moderate riches and wealth. I'm inspired to this by an article that appeared in the Atlantic magazine about 6 months ago, which pointed out that while everyone is talking about the 1% and the 99%, that in fact, if you look at the US case, it's the top 10% who've done well. The 1%, of course, have gone out of sight. But in terms of who has benefited from economic growth, it's quite the people in the top 9.9% have actually done quite well. Well, even though the Gini coefficient was expanding, I was just wondering if there's any research on that, what you might call the middling levels of richness and well-being.
With that, we can first have some responses, then we can go to a second round. So.
Yeah, of course, especially in Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, of course, also South Asia, the colonial history is clear, not only in the past but in present time. Okay, every country in Southeast Asia is divided and determined by the colonial period. The French, Netherlands, English, and other. Earlier on, Portugal and so on. So the division of this previous pre-colonial kingdom, people tend to say they are Mandela form, that is coexistence of different kingdoms, and also in the age of sea commerce and trafficking and everything. So that's people move across the Bay of Bengal and Penang and Calcutta. They have Thai people, Myanmar, Burmese, and the Japanese and Chinese and Indian and everything, really. Okay, so an era, of course. But in this post-colonial period, the building of the nation state, they actually, so that is an institutional syncretism. They use this system to govern their own citizens or their own subjects, okay, according to the hierarchical order of race. So this Bumiputra or this Aboriginal priority would exclude minority groups, not to mention minority Aboriginal people. Okay. So post-colonial period actually is still in a colonial system. But how do we think of decolonization? Of course, we are not talking about this military revolution of this nation state. Okay, they do their decolonization in their military form. We need to think what are the operating, functioning systems, institutions, and episteme, right? So that we can think of the epistemic decolonization. But epistemic decolonization is not just to replace one knowledge with the other. For example, the Eurocentric knowledge with Sinocentric knowledge, because within the Semitic world, clearly there's a hierarchical order, very clear. Okay, the hierarchical order of this all this part status is defined very early on. Okay, that's also why women do not enjoy their equality for a long, long time. So epistemic decolonization to challenge, of course, also to stand to challenge the functioning of common sense, functioning practice of the governance, functioning logic of the episteme, of course. Okay, but that episteme actually is materialized through institutions, so and also supported by law. So we always need to challenge the law. Yeah, that's both answering your question and Stan's question.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think it's really interesting what you're saying. I don't really have an informed comment to it. I just find it very interesting, this survey that I mentioned in the Time magazine, where it turns out that all the moderately wealthy that you talk about, they don't consider themselves wealthy. And this tells us that they're in a sense missing something in their lives. Even though they are incredibly rich, they're still missing wealth or value in a sense. And it's maybe a kind of a naive point, but there is something strange about that situation where value doesn't come with wealth. So, yes, yeah.
For the second round, maybe.
No, I was wondering if I'm wondering whether, in fact, since you're notion, I've just got this song going through my head, which is the famous Broadway musical Annie Get You Done. And she says, she's very poor, and she says, I've got no money, I've got no bills, but I've got the sun in the morning and the moon at night. So, in a sense, she's expressing your point, and I'm wondering, I'm sort of wondering whether there's not a kind of romanticism in there, which is a romanticism which comes as a function of the transformations affected by the invention of capital. And going back to Marx, that in a sense Marx's point is one's humanity is actually alienated through the forces of capital. I mean, that's the whole point of the theory of labour value, that this is extracted from the very body which reduces the humanity of the people involved. So in a sense, the resistance is to say, well, I've still got my humanity, when in fact you've lost it. Everything has been appropriated and taken, so that I'm wondering whether, whether in fact you are overcoming Marx, actually, whether in fact Marx has already got that argument and the conditions for a kind of revaluation. I mean, the whole point about looking at Anne Wiener and so forth is that this is also a romantic notion that's existing, if I can sort of say, what's existing in anthropology, that somehow there's the perfect being that capital is somehow destroyed. But capital's been working all the time, to do that. It's created the romantic resistance, put it that way. And so this division between wealth and riches is something which is then reappropriated. Even so, when you go to your Time magazine, the wealthy people, the rich, if I can put it that way, have even appropriated the capacity to have wealth. They have got wealth, and this is the big awful thing that's happened. Okay, that in a sense, the rich are the only human beings that exist. Everyone else is in a sense excluded, which is the march of capital. I think we're in that point at the moment. That's, in a sense, I really feel that when we think about populism and so on, rather than sort of rule it out and sort of dismiss it as racist, which it is, we should think about it a bit more. It's a revolutionary moment. I think we're at the beginning of another kind of revolution and world history.
Well, I can just only add to that, and I think that, of course, who's romantic and who's not romantic, you know. I think Marx was quite romantic, I think you're romanticizing also. But I guess the point, and exactly, it's your point, that once capital has swallowed everything, we are at that point now. So like you say, you know, perhaps there is no outside to capital. Then we as academics or analysts should actually try to reset our positions then, and try to think of what it was then that could be outside of capital. So we have to reappropriate some form of notion of what it is that could be outside of capital. And this has to do with trying to. I just have the feeling that when like Piketty or these economic analysts looking at economic wealth as appropriated wealth, appropriated money, and activists go out and say that we need to look at this. It should be taxated. It should be a redistribution of their funds. Amazon should pay taxes to these governments. This is all great, but the argument of distribution itself is already within the capitalist motion of openness, distribution, and everything. So in a sense, I have a feeling that activists, in that sense, are barking up the wrong tree, and maybe leftists, you know, are barking up the wrong tree because they're not focusing on value; they're actually focusing on money. In a sense. So I just want to reappropriate that issue of some kernel of value to human life. I guess it's romantic.
So what I think we'll do is we'll do like a two question round. But if I can take advantage of my privilege of holding the microphone, I would also like to ask the first question. Again, this is also it's related, I think, to the previous question. I'm wondering about this opposition that you make between the wealth form and the capital form as these kind of opposed sort of forms. So for example, it's counterfactual. Why not consider the commodity form as a subset of the wealth form rather than its conceptual opposite? And what I'm thinking here is, for example, is you use quantification in the sense that quantification is somehow a demystifying process, and that there's kind of a pushback in a Polanyi sense against quantification. But then again, I could think of quantification as itself not necessarily demystified, that it does itself have that mystified element of wealth in a sense. I'm thinking like, so the demystification of the GDP numbers is not necessarily a demystification of wealth, but is itself a mystified idea of wealth. Thinking of China's mystification of the 8% growth rate. It was not just it was quantification, but also it was the double movement was already in it as well. And likewise, on the other end, the idea of going beyond money value. I mean, of course, the echoes of symbolic capital, the echoes of cultural capital, which is, of course, trying to reduce some of what you talk about, such as the value of art, to some other form of capital. So I guess the question I have basically is this opposition that you're positing between wealth and capital a structural argument? Is it a metaphysical kind of claim, or is this a claim about an opposition that people make, whether or not we might agree with it from like an analytical perspective? And I'm thinking of, is this dialectic between wealth and capital necessarily like a contradiction, or is there already an unclear opposition? I'm assuming where this opposition is located conceptually. And maybe one other question.
Related to this question, I just have give you an example that the confusion between the wealth and capital actually is not a modern phenomenon. I mean, the Chinese custom of giving red envelope, 红包, to the family members. Okay, this is really interesting because It's supposed to be the expression of wealth, expression of happiness, and the elders give red envelope to the family members. Okay, and cash, and actually it's in cash, but it's put into the envelope, red envelope. So the cash itself is very clearly it's numbered. Okay, it's calculated. So you give the money to the most, the very most money to the person you like the most or the closest one. So the money itself, the money itself is expression of this new numbers. Okay, but they put into the envelope. So that creates certain kind of gift-like form. And in a way that it is cooperate with capital, but at the same time they try to disguise it, or you want to say disguise it, but I would say more positively, it's not just disguise it. It's also it's a way of try to distance it from this kind of capital mentality, this market mentality. So kind of interesting that it's a very old forms of gift. At the same time, it's all forms of money. It's also money. So to me, that the wealth and the rich you're talking about, actually it's not really in opposition. It's more like in a relation of which one is encompass the other. That probably is the point I was trying to make.
Yes, both very good questions, and I think this is this aspect that Derek was asking about. Why is not the commodity a wealth form? This is what I'm trying to express, is that the commodity form has appropriated the wealth form, but it's kept it also, in a sense. So each, and I think like the last question was asking, I think we're doing this all the time in our commodity transactions, that we are operating both the inalienability of the object, but also the commercialization of the object. So we are actually playing on that, and that whole essay about the gift by Mars and Morse, that was exactly about that. It's been confused a little bit recently because the issue has been raised about the dichotomy: is it gifts or is it commodities? And I think the Chinese they're quite good at operating both at once, in a sense, like you're describing, and also burning money and as a sacrifice, which is quite interesting in terms of the vitality of and the play with commodities as a form, and the play exactly with this dynamic between vitality and life and identity and personality and originality and the commodity alienation of that capacity. And it has also been pointed out that the commodity form in itself is also a double structure. It's always a double structure. And one skin of the object, you can buy it in the store and you can sell it again. But you also buy the object to reinvigorate your life in a certain way. So both on the small scale and on the large scale, there are issues of that dynamic that I'm describing. I'm trying to grasp of this dynamic between life and alienation of life, so to speak. So this is what I'm trying to get at in my lacking way.
You want to add a comment before I answer?
For another round of comments? Yes.
Also, a question for Professor Knut. on the double structure of the vitality aspect of the wealth. As your ethnography has pointed out, the life-giving party has to be repaid in order for the person to get their autonomous agency, right? Like the payment for the mother's brother. And we know this a lot in Southeast Asia and also in Oceania. But yeah, I really appreciate your refreshing thought in liberating our state conceptualization of wealth in modern times. But I'm also curious about the repayment or payment of life-giving aspects of wealth, because wealth, if we emphasize on its vitality aspect, and it also entails debt, and the debt is also related to one's life, right? Which is like the primitive original form of enslavement. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that, the so-called double structure on the other side.
Okay, we can open up to another question. We're actually close on time, and so when asking a question, consider, do you value your stomach or do you value your mind? And other people holding it against you maybe. But if you have a good question, please ask a question. No pressure. Okay, people are very hungry, so I'll allow you to respond. Maybe others wants to say a few words as well.
Yes, what you were talking about now is comes out of the work I've done in the Pacific, in this Pacific island nation called Vanuatu, and if you're an anthropologist, you also know about Melanesia and Marcel Mauss and the Kula trade and the particular attitude that people in Melanesia perhaps have towards the material world. And I think in many ways a much more mature concept of materiality and value, in a sense, where they all the time continually work with objects and their capacity, and the threatening capacity of objects to actually alienate the human life. And so what I was talking about yesterday, for instance, this just highlights this their reflections around the problematic aspect of having economic relations between close relatives, for instance. And so whereas we are, me at least, living in Norway, I have a particular attitude towards the commodities that I live with in my life, which is a very particular historical situation that I should take this attitude towards the stored products that surround me in my daily life. People in Vanuatu, they live differently with their objects, and they have different attitudes. And my point yesterday was to try to highlight a small part of that life world of the structure of relations versus commodities, in a sense. So when we are the thing I was talking about now has to do with the consumerist society and the tendency to invest a lot of life and vitality into commercial objects. So whereas people in Vanuatu, you could do a comparison then, whereas people in Melanesia would work upon objects and sacrifice them in order to highlight that life is immaterial. We have different attitudes to material objects in Norway, at least. So, yeah. Thank you.
Just maybe a few words. I think we need to differentiate capital from capitalism. We need to differentiate wealth from money form, commodity form, and so on. To have wealth is not bad, but when that wealth needs somebody else to do the manual work, to support, to labor, to increase, to expand, and so that the expansion and this increase of this wealth can contribute to the establishment of a larger clan or tribe or a state, then they need this bureaucratic system, institutional practices to sustain and to hold those wealth in place. Then that is a law. So those are the things we need to analyze. We all could imagine a good society, but we are facing not good enough or even a vice society. So we need to figure out what are the problems, what's functioning, what's dominating people's mentality, and they take it for granted. So we need to do things about this operating logic that's being there. Just another words about this unequal distribution, not to mention Indonesia, is the high percentage. But recently I visited Malaysia, and they say that the 5 richest Chinese families, their wealth equals to the total GDP of the whole country, but they don't pay tax, and they stay very low-key. But their children studying in Australia can visit their parents every week through, but they have their ticket. And they're provided this money portion to run their business right after they finish their study. So but who are those poor people in East Malaysia, or those people on these islands of Indonesia, and why do they need to go away to find job and suffer from discrimination? So that is a problem.
Please join me in thanking our speakers.
For the session. And we now have a lunch.